That belly that many men accept as an inevitable part of aging, the grandpa gut or retiree belly, is not just an aesthetic issue. Behind that increase in size hides one of the most harmful factors for prostate health, abdominal fat, also known as visceral fat. Unlike the fat that accumulates just under the skin, visceral fat resides between the organs of the abdomen, the liver, intestines, pancreas, and exerts direct pressure on the bladder and prostate. But the most dangerous part is that it is not inactive. This fat acts as an inflammation factory, releasing chemicals that disrupt hormonal balance and promote prostate enlargement. One of the main effects of this fat is increasing the activity of an enzyme called aromatase, responsible for converting testosterone into estrogen. The result: lower testosterone levels, higher estrogen levels, and a prostate much more vulnerable to inflammation and growth. Additionally, excess weight in the abdominal area exerts constant pressure on the bladder. This explains why many overweight men feel urinary urgency, weak flow, or the sensation of incomplete emptying. It's not just a matter of age, but how the body is functioning internally. I remember Don Felipe, a 69-year-old patient who came to the clinic worried about waking up every 2 hours at night. His tests showed an enlarged prostate, but also a waist well above healthy measures. I suggested a simple plan: walk 30 minutes daily and reduce refined sugars and ultra-processed foods. 6 months later, he returned with remarkable improvement. He had lost nearly 7 centimeters from his waist, slept better, and his urinary symptoms had halved. His phrase stuck with me: "Doctor, I feel lighter, inside and out." That is the magic of small, sustained changes. Reducing abdominal fat doesn't mean living on a strict diet or giving up foods you enjoy. It means making smarter choices. Replace sugary drinks with water or natural infusions. Swap fried foods and white bread for fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Choose lean proteins such as fish, chicken, or legumes. And above all, move more. You don't need to run marathons. Walking, swimming, or practicing Tai Chi can make a big difference. Every kilo lost in the abdominal area reduces pressure on the prostate and improves blood circulation. It also helps control blood sugar and blood pressure, factors that directly influence prostate health. So, if that little belly is starting to bother you, see it as a signal, not an inevitable ornament. Because beyond aesthetics, reducing abdominal fat is an investment in your health, energy, and long-term well-being. The habit of reclining while eating didn't originate in Rome, but in Greece. Long before the Romans dominated the Mediterranean, the Greeks had perfected the art of the banquet, the symposium, a gathering where food, wine, and conversation formed a social and almost philosophical ritual. In these meetings, free men reclined on couches, discussed politics, art, and ethics, and drank in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and pleasure. It was a space where the body rested, but the mind remained alert. When Rome began absorbing Hellenic culture after its conquests in southern Italy and Greece, it not only took their architecture, mythology, and philosophy but also adopted their way of celebrating life. The Romans saw in the Greek banquet a practice that fit perfectly with their own idea of social prestige. Thus, the Triclinium was born, the Roman dining arrangement inspired by the Greek model but adapted to Roman scale and spirit, grander, more political, more theatrical. However, in Rome, this custom acquired a different meaning. For the Greeks, the symposium had an intellectual, almost spiritual component. Dialogue was as important as wine. For the Romans, reclining at a banquet became a tangible display of power and dominance. Reclining was not just resting, it was a gesture of superiority. Only free citizens, and among them, the wealthiest, had the right to do it. Women, except in rare cases or in the privacy of the home, usually ate sitting, and slaves, of course, stood, attentive to every command. This difference reveals much about the Roman character. While Greece sought balance between pleasure and thought, Rome turned it into hierarchy and ostentation. Where Greeks saw the banquet as a forum of ideas, Romans turned it into an extension of the Senate, a space where alliances were forged, favors exchanged, and social positions consolidated. Reclining to eat was, at heart, a visual metaphor of dominance. Those who could do it were served, and their very presence demanded attention and deference. The adoption of this custom coincided with the rise of the empire, a period in which luxury and theatricality became essential to the Roman ideal. Patrician houses competed to have the most opulent triclinia, with fine mosaics, exotic perfumes, and delicacies brought from distant provinces. Eating was no longer just nourishment, it was a performance of Roman greatness through the refinement of the body and abundance of the banquet. Thus, what began as a Hellenic practice of relaxation and dialogue was transformed in Roman hands into a ritual of power and belonging. A simple gesture, reclining to eat, became a cultural symbol so ingrained that it would define for centuries how Rome saw itself, a civilization that dined reclining because it could afford to. The Triclinium was not just a dining room. It was the symbolic heart of the Roman home, a space where the host's wealth, culture, and influence were displayed. Its name comes from the Greek tri, three, and klein, couch or bed, referring to the three couches arranged in a U shape around a central table. This arrangement was not accidental, it was designed to encourage conversation while leaving an open space for slaves to move around, serving without interrupting the spectacle of the banquet. Each couch, called a lectus, could accommodate up to 3 diners, who reclined on their left side, resting their elbow on a cushion and eating with their right hand. The position closest to the entrance of the triclinium was the least honorable, while the center of the right-hand couch, the lectus medius, was reserved for the host or the highest-ranking guest. In this way, how one positioned oneself at the table was, in itself, a declaration of social hierarchy. The triclinium was a carefully designed stage. Romans decorated it with elaborate mosaics, colorful frescoes, and bronze lamps. In patrician homes, the walls often depicted mythological scenes or banquets of the gods, as if the host sought to equate his feast with that of the immortals of Olympus. Floors were covered with multicolored marble, and the central table, often made of citrus wood or carved marble, served as an altar of abundance. During grand banquets, the triclinium became a total sensory experience. The aromas of dishes mixed with incense, exotic perfumes, and the sounds of music. Musicians, dancers, and poets recited verses while guests drank wine blended with honey and spices. Dim lighting from oil lamps highlighted the gleam of bronze and gold, creating an almost ritualistic atmosphere. The triclinium was also a space for covert politics. Dinners were not only for entertaining friends but also for negotiating alliances, favors, and future marriages. Sometimes, a whispered word over a cup could change the fate of a family or the course of a public career. That is why Romans paid as much attention to the details of the banquet as to speeches in the Senate. Prestige was built both in the forum and at the table. Interestingly, the triclinium also had a religious character. Before beginning the banquet, hosts performed a small libation, pouring a few drops of wine in honor of the household gods, the Lares. Eating was, in addition to a social act, a way to honor ancestors and destiny. For this reason, the most solemn banquets coincided with religious festivals or celebrations of victory, marriage, or birth. The art of reclining to eat, therefore, went far beyond physical pleasure. It was a staging of Roman order, where every gesture, posture, and dish communicated something about the host's power, taste, and social position. Reclining was a way of saying, I am free, I am a citizen, and I belong to those who rule the world. If the triclinium was the stage for refinement, it was also the stage for excess. Behind the elegance of marble, perfumes, and philosophical conversation lay a more carnal reality. The Roman banquet was a ritual of pleasure, and sometimes of pure ostentation. Eating while reclining represented not only relaxation but also mastery of one's time, body, and above all, the pleasures life could offer. The wealthiest Romans took this practice to almost theatrical levels. Historians mention banquets with 7 or 8 main courses, accompanied by exotic fruits, wines imported from Hispania or Greece, and animals never before seen in Italy. Oysters from the Red Sea, peacocks, flamingos, moray eels, stuffed hares, and even nightingale tongues were symbols of the host's purchasing power and sophistication. It was not just a dinner, it was a declaration of grandeur. The writer Petronius, in his famous work The Satyricon, masterfully portrayed this culture of extravagance. In the celebrated Dinner of Trimalchio, a wealthy freedman organizes an extravagant banquet where dishes are presented in absurd forms, such as boars stuffed with live birds or cakes hiding gold figures, while the host flaunts his wealth and ignorance. Petronius's satire is no accident. In imperial Rome, the banquet had become a mirror of the vices of power. During these celebrations, wine flowed without measure. Slaves responsible for serving it carefully mixed wine with water in large craters, as drinking it straight was considered barbaric. However, as the night progressed, the proportions changed. Formal conversations gave way to laughter, games, dances, heated debates, and even episodes of debauchery. Romans distinguished between convivium, moderate pleasure banquet, and commisatio, the afterparty, focused on drinking. It was during this second part that decorum faded and wine revealed the most human impulses. The philosopher Seneca, a critical witness of the excesses of his time, ironically wrote of those who dine until dawn, with full stomachs and empty souls. For him, the Roman banquet had become a symbol of moral decay, a demonstration that Rome, though powerful, was beginning to lose the balance between virtue and pleasure. But for others, like Pliny the Elder, excess had a physiological justification. Reclining helped digestion, allowing the body to endure prolonged and copious meals. Some hosts took their passion for excess to the extreme. Archaeologists have found curious utensils in Roman villas, long-handled spoons to reach dishes from a reclining position, cups decorated with precious stones, and small containers used to induce vomiting. Yes, vomiting was part of the ritual, not as an act of sickness, but as a strategy. By emptying the stomach, the diner could continue enjoying the feast without losing pleasure. Paradoxically, it was a form of limitless abundance: eat more, drink more, prolong pleasure. However, the banquet was not only physical excess. It was also a game of appearances. In the Rome of the emperors, reclining to eat became a metaphor for control and hierarchy. Each guest had to maintain an image of elegance even in excess. Manners, words, tone of voice, and the way of taking bread or drinking wine were regulated by an unwritten social code. A rude gesture or an inappropriate comment could ruin a man's reputation as much as a political defeat. Not everyone looked upon these customs with approval. Republican moralists and the early Christians saw Roman banquets as a symbol of the empire's moral collapse. For them, reclining to eat was an act of arrogance, a denial of temperance. Writers like Tertullian and St. Augustine condemned the practice as a sin of gluttony and pride, contrasting it with the simplicity of communal meals. Yet, although Christianity eventually imposed new customs, the image of the Roman reclining, cup in hand and serene gaze, was forever imprinted on Western cultural memory. Thus, the Roman banquet was much more than a gathering of diners, it reflected the deepest tensions of the Roman soul. Between virtue and pleasure, between moderation and excess, the Romans built a way of celebrating life that, even today, fascinates with its mix of refinement, theatricality, and contradiction. With the fall of the Roman Empire, many of its traditions vanished, but others, like reclining to eat, left a silent mark still felt in modern culture. Though it may seem extravagant today, this practice was for centuries a symbol of civilization, refinement, and mastery over the body, a way to transform the simple act of eating into an expression of power and social belonging. Romans did not merely eat, they represented their position in the world. Reclining was an assertion of freedom, a way of saying, "I do not need to rush." In a society where manual labor was reserved for slaves, being able to spend hours at the table was the greatest luxury. Eating while lying down was less a matter of comfort than of status. It was a visual declaration of absolute control over one's time, environment, and others. This idea survived, transformed, in medieval banquets, where kings and lords dined at long tables while servants stood. The concept of the banquet as spectacle also endured. Delicacies, music, toasts, dances, and speeches became essential to courtly life. Though no one reclined literally, the spirit of the Triclinium, the act of eating as a demonstration of power and distinction, persisted in new forms. Over the centuries, the posture changed, but the essence of the ritual remained. During the Renaissance, Italian noble meals revived the Roman aesthetic, tables overflowing with fruits, crystal glasses, portraits of diners surrounded by servants, laughter, and discussions about art and politics. Eating remained a form of dialogue and, above all, a social display. Even today, echoes of the Roman banquet can be seen in traditions associated with sophistication, long business lunches, gala dinners, diplomatic banquets, or celebratory family meals. While no one now reclines on velvet cushions, the gesture of prolonging a meal, toasting, and conversing for hours remains a way to honor shared time and affirm the importance of togetherness. Ultimately, the Roman custom of eating while reclining was not only about physical pleasure but a philosophy of life. For them, the banquet was almost sacred, a space where bodies rested but ideas ignited. In dining rooms adorned with mosaics and fragrances, Romans did not just nourish themselves, they debated the fate of the empire, recited verses, shared confidences, and forged alliances that could change history. Through time, this connection between food, conversation, and power remained alive. From the emperor's tables to modern dinners where political or business decisions are made, the banquet continues to be a stage where food and discourse intertwine. Today, when we view a painting of a Roman feast or visit the ruins of Pompeii and see the remains of a triclinium, we understand that behind those couches and cups there was not just luxury but a way of understanding existence, to enjoy life intensely, yet with purpose. For the Romans, reclining while eating was a metaphor for their world, an empire resting upon its power and abundance, believing it could eternally savor the feast of dominion. And though centuries have passed, that blend of hedonism, elegance, and contradiction remains alive. Because every time we sit, or recline, to share a long meal, converse, and laugh, without checking the clock, without rushing, we are, unknowingly, repeating a small Roman gesture. A daily homage to a custom that, although extinct in form, lives on in spirit.